All right. Hey, and welcome to another episode of Saving a Craft Load of Money, a series by the Beverage Federation. Yes, we're focused on day two operations of running your craft facility. You're up and running, and now what? I am joined today by Adrian Gram with Brew Movers, and I'm excited to jump into your world a bit on all things logistics and shipping because there's always a lot going on. So, Adrian, thanks for joining me. And maybe we kick things off. You tell us just a little bit more about Brew Movers.
Yeah, thanks, Dan. Thanks for having us on. Been a part of the Federation for quite some time, and it's always great seeing you out there at the shows and supporting all the same industries and things like that. So thanks for having us on here today.
Absolutely. Yeah, I'm glad you could join it. Yeah, there's a lot of discussion typically going on. And it's one of the things that's helpful about this is, you only have a few minutes sometimes to bring somebody up to speed at a show, right? They're absorbing a lot. It's great to be able to put out some things where they can listen or, watch a little bit on this, especially on maybe it's on a category that they're like, listen, I don't have the time to dive into it, or who should I talk to, and who's the subject matter expert. So I'm glad. Thanks for coming and jumping in the hot seat. So we'll
Yeah.
get things started here. You could tell us a little bit about Brew Movers and you guys overall, but it kind of segues. I'm gonna have you answer two questions out of the gate so that for people who are aware of who you are and what you do. But I think one of the things that would be helpful is what are some of the challenges in your space that you're seeing as you talk about Brew Movers?
Yeah, absolutely. So to kick it off real quick, so Brew Movers officially founded back in 2016. We fell into the industry by chance. My partner's brother was working for Southern Grist. They out of Tennessee. They went to a festival. They showed up at the festival and their beer wasn't there, right? Because it
Mm,
got lost in transit. And so they ended up sitting at a festival with no beer to pour. Uh, it happened again, and at that moment, his brother reached out to Brandon, my partner, and said, "Hey, could you move this?" And at that point, we knew we shipped a lot of different commodities, but not specifically focused in the beer or beverage world. And that was the match, right? That's the start of everything. Fast forward to today, we're in and out of approximately 3,500 plus or minus beverage producing companies. And really, instead of just doing final product, which I think a lot of people think of us, we've actually become more of their supply chain logistics consultants. We're there to help them evaluate every single thing that they have coming in and out of their production facilities, or co-packers for that matter, because there's a lot of that going on today. And really helping to evaluate and making sure that there's not excessive markups or an opportunity to fine tune or reduce cost, whether it's cans coming in, glass bottles, ingredients, base products, or then even on the final going out. There's sometimes that we see that vendors even end up marking up our freight rates more than even our markup is. And I'm like, man, I think I'm in the wrong business.
yeah.
And so we're there as a kind of a guide to kind of help, whether you're just starting up or you've been doing this a long time, and trying to look at your supply chain and try to optimize those, right? And so now you go back and you ask the question, what are some of the biggest challenges that we're seeing out there, from the supply chain side? I think I got to answer this in two different types of modes or products that we have out there. You have LTL and you have truckload. And there's pros and cons to each one of them. We just got off of a call a little bit earlier this morning, and LTL is becoming more and more of a struggle, as there's less supply in the market. Carriers and customers have pushed more freight onto LTL shipments, more so than ever before. And so what this has actually caused is LTL carriers to be running at higher utilizations on their truck and
Hmm.
in their terminals. And as we continue to go through, they've moved a lot of product off of truckload and into smaller quantity pallet shipments, right? Because we're buying less, we're consuming less. So you don't need full truckload capacity, which is more of a dedicated a faster type of shipment than putting it into the LTL networks. When you see that happening, we're seeing more damages happening. We're seeing longer delays in shipping. And for those of you that are out there, and whether you're working with Brew Movers or any other broker or any other carrier directly, I think the message is going to be the same, right? So it doesn't matter whether you're working with Brew Movers or another type of broker, we still leverage the same type of carriers. It's the front end and the back end customer service that changes a little bit on those. However, you still can't change the fact that none of us are driving the truck, none of us are running the forklift. And we're seeing that across the board with customers that despite different selections and carriers, you're still getting poor in transit service and performance, which makes nobody happy, right? And so, if I could give anybody on this call a tip that if you're choosing to do LTL and you do have critical deadlines from a production standpoint, whether that's at your own brewery or your co-packer and things such as that, I would highly encourage giving a buffer into those transit times to just ensure that your product is there and ready stage so you're not getting those penalties or your production brewing that day is going to be in jeopardy because you didn't have your hops or you didn't have your other ingredients to drop into it. So,
Yeah, thanks, Adrian. I think you mentioned some things that I'm definitely hearing, and it sounds like you guys are as well. I don't think a lot of people are aware of. Um, that's the great thing about talking to someone who, you're in the middle of this. This is your subject matter expert here passing this along. But I just hear the tail end, right? Like, oh, we used this guy and they used to be good and things were, 2 week average and think life was good. And now suddenly it's longer and it's damaged. And I think that some of the blame falls to like, that's, it's just it is. I see a lot of shrugged shoulders, right? They're like, I guess it is what it is, and maybe it's that guy not knowing that that's something that's happening nationally and to the industry and to others. So that's interesting and kind of like the source of some of that. But I also hear something that, when you talk about what you do is a starting point for a lot of breweries. A lot of people I talk to, they're established breweries. They're like, this is, we've been doing this. We went through COVID, and all of that, and it's just gotten harder because our processes are whatever, our Excel sheet, our back of the napkin that worked in 2019 doesn't seem to work now. Like I'm still ordering kind of the same thing, kind of the same way, kind of stuff, but it's not turning out the well. I'm missing deadlines. I'm missing, brew days, whatever that is.
yep.
I had a brewery that mentioned that they go, we used to have two things. We had a guy who kind of knew it, but it was in his head, and he left. And then the one organization that they were calling that someone was doing this kind of part-time, they had it also in their head, was helping with some of their shipments and that left and it just left a huge gap in their logistics of like how do you how do you start to build something where it's like all they saw was cost, just like
Mhm.
everything felt more complicated, longer lead time, and no one seemed to know how to like put together a playbook. And this wasn't a super large facility, it was a medium-sized brewery who just I think they felt like they were like I could just see from their thing as like just shrug the shoulders like I guess I just have to pay through the nose and it gets here when it gets here. It just felt like defeat like when I get a call from the phone company and they're like we're raising your rate, like it just I don't know, it felt there wasn't a lot to do. Is that where you guys you get into at the end there, you're kind of mentioning some of the things that you can do for that. Can you talk a little bit about things that breweries could do to solve those problems that are, maybe brewery X, you don't have to share breweries, but some things you guys are solving for some others that are dealing with this in different parts of the country, the conversion to LTL, the shipping, changes in shipping lead times, things like that.
Yeah, I think I can agree to this in like kind of a same story, and then also talk about some of the ways that we've been helping some customers, and we, to your point, right? So whether they're startup or medium size or well-established breweries that have been doing this for decades, right? We've been hearing more and more requests, and we've actually been getting more and more requests to have even just exploratory conversations about like, well, this is the way we've been doing it,
Yeah.
but how would you suggest doing it? Or is there any other best practice out there that you think could be more successful for us? And I really kind of dove in on those because I think every customer is a little bit different. But to your point, we're seeing this kind of growing trend where people are they've had in-house logistics. Now they've slowed up, or maybe their out-of-state distribution has slowed up. And so now that value on that individual, and what they're doing is not as the return on the investment's not there when you hire the individual. But what we've seen is some of those logistics individuals are now being repurposed into sort of order processing individuals, or keeping relationships up at the distributions or the retailers, and they've changed roles and responsibilities, and they've asked us to take care of connecting the dots for them and being more like their outsourced in-house logistics team.
Yep.
Right? And when we've done that, is we over time you become to learn your delivery locations, right? And so we end up becoming and developing a relationship with that receiving manager and everything else, because we're constantly reaching out on behalf of XYZ production company. And when you do that repetitively, then we're understanding when their delivery times are there, or when the pickup times, or when it has to be there. And I think to your point is like, with all the chaos that's going on and people trying to figure out the cost of goods, are people going to be coming to my tap room? Are people going to be coming to my distillery, right? And drinking? You forget to ask those little questions in your supply chain process that ends up causing catastrophic returns down the road. And one of the things, and I'm not trying to toot our horn, but because we are in the space of shipping and logistics specifically for the beverage, we understand that we know to understand and ask about when is the production day, and when does it have to be there, and when is production going to be finished, and when does XYZ grocery store need to have it by. And understanding transit times and in various different modes, it helps us to give that owner back those sort of critical points to say, okay, production is going to finish on this day, but it's not going to, you don't want it delivered for 8 days later. This is going to cost you money. And then
Yep.
they get to make that business decision at that point. Over the last couple months, and now I know we're out of it, but here's another point is we saw so many production companies or beverage companies going to ship in January, February, and even the beginning of March, and they forgot to say my product could freeze. But
Mm.
that's one of those things. It's that little thing that people forget because you're going so fast and wearing so many hats in your business, that working with partners that can know those questions to ask, because that's their area of subject matter expertise, is going to make you more successful. Because like in those situations, had that customer ship those seltzers, which don't contain alcohol, on a dry truck and it freezes in the middle of Wisconsin, there's zero recourse.
Yeah.
There's absolutely zero recourse because you shipped it on a dry container. And the insurance companies are in the business of not paying insurance. That's why they have very big buildings. They own every stadium and just about all the real estate in the world, right? And so they protect themselves against that type of stuff. But now if you ship it on a reefer and you say this can't go below this temperature, and it does, you actually then have recourse. But it's that front end planning and those front end details that get missed, right? If you're not focused on it, right?
Yeah. I couldn't when you're saying that, I was thinking of a picture I had seen in early January of an owner who was doing a launch, and it was when you're trying to roll out your first batch and it's too cold for the company parts hydraulics to work, and it was like -5 in Chicago or something like that. and they had to rent a U-Haul. And then it said later on that they got there and they didn't have the right, didn't have a dock to, to drop it off it and the right connection. And it was a story of like perseverance. But when I looked at it, it was like that seems like a very costly, frustrating day. Like, you weren't talking to someone in December who was asking the questions of like, do they have a dock? Does it need a foot load? Or, how cool, what's it going to be for this or that?
Yep.
It just, and they, kind of thing. And that planning, for sure. You get into those solving those problems. And I think that's a big thing that I talked to a lot of breweries about. You also touched on the other thing that I hear, a lot and from a lot of breweries is that when you talk about that helping out with like for someone who's established and saying, they're going, this is how we do it. Can you tell me how you would do it? And become kind of that like fractional part-time, like, this is how we can help do that. Time saving and peace of mind. Like I think that so many business owners value that. Um, there's so much conversation around cost, and it's very important. But if you can save me time because I've been doing it one way, and you say, hey, you can do it this way, and I can take care of that. I can send you an email when it's done. There's like this like, you know what? I completely value that because it took me 2 hours every Monday and then I would lose a little sleep. On Tuesday it would go sideways, and I would be pissed all day, and kind of thing. And I think that 1-2 kind of thing has so much value when you're talking about I'm trying to get this here by then, or I'm trying to get this in house to get this other stuff down as time saving and peace of mind.
We see
Yeah.
it all the time. You go back to the cost and the time and everything else, and sometimes I do see the negative side of this. And yeah, Brew Movers is not always the cheapest. And in the logistics world, you can call up anybody at any second, and you could get a bottom barrel rate. And yes, it may go well today and tomorrow, but can it be sustained over time? And we see that a lot of times. And sometimes I even see where companies are investing a lot of personnel into their logistics program to save 20 or $30 a shipment, right? And they're having to solicit 4, 5, 6 different brokers. So they have to send out those emails, they have to receive them, you have to go through them, they have to track them to save $20 a pallet. Now I get cost is cost and you have to reduce those. But I do see over time that, if you're paying an individual $60,000, right, to save $20 a shipment, that's a lot.
Yep.
So what we've seen in some of what are well-established breweries, is they're not, I'm not saying to get rid of your logistics person, please trust me, that's not the case, but they're repositioning them to be more of a strategic logistics individual, right? Once you get the good partners in place, whether that's us or somebody else, but working more in a collaborative experience so that they're managing the relationships at these different supply chain providers. And then they know that when they tag that logistics provider, that their back is covered, and they're only going to be called when there's an exception. And so then they're only managing the exception, but their $60,000 in the return on investment in managing those relationships, buying better, doing that, is what I'm seeing more people be successful at these days.
I would agree, and I think that in itself could be a topic of just that idea of resourcing is such an interesting thing. I see a lot of breweries are at a size where the owner's been doing it for a long time, and it's just another hat. Maybe they're starting to grow, or they're doing there to realize I can't do it, but I'm not at a point to jump to bring on someone to do full-time logistics or even strategic logistics. I need help someone doing this, and then they can see, so with that kind of that part-time fractional help me develop the playbook. Yeah, that is definitely a trend where they just feel like I won't be able to do that until I get to this size. But I want to touch on something that you mentioned and see what your thoughts are. And I don't know if it's what you're going to say, but I'm always interested in trends in the industry, trends in for logistics and shipping and supply chain. What are you thinking is the direction for 2025, or is it already here on some of these things that you're seeing coming down the pipeline? You talked already about the transition for LTL.
Yep.
Anything else to touch on from a trend that you're seeing that or you feel like is already here and started in 2024 from the logistics industry?
Yeah, absolutely. I think using this platform to help educate everybody out there so you can better plan for your business is probably the right thing to do, right? And so I do see on forums, on a lot of Facebook forums and things like that, there's a lot of talk about the cost of shipping, right?
Hmm.
The cost of shipping is extremely expensive. I want to take a moment to give the listeners and whoever watches this a little bit of insight into it and explain why, unfortunately, we're going to have to build this cost plus into our future forecast. Because in my opinion, and please, I hope I'm wrong, but we have seen the floor and it's not going to go down, unfortunately. And here's why. So reverse back to COVID. So my partner Brandon and I actually owned a fleet of trucks. They were very nice trucks. We did over the road trucking. Everything was great. We used to purchase those trucks for 150 some $1,000s a piece for the power unit. And then the trailers were about $30,000 a piece. Immediately after COVID, we had the opportunity to renew our trucks, buy new trucks, and continue to replace them, because you have to replace them every 4 to 5 years, because that's about the useful life before you have to replace the engines and everything else. Those asset prices on the power units alone went from $155,000 to over 225.
Hmm.
And the trailers went from 30,000 to 40,000. Okay. And that was back in COVID time. Okay. And so those prices went up and they're still up that high. They haven't come down at all. Right. Back then, the cost to turn on one of those trucks ran at about $1.67 a mile. So in other words, you don't turn a profit unless you can obtain more than that, right?
Hmm.
And that was back then. So then what ended up happening is shortly after that, we have actually been in a capacity and demand recession. So that's why all of the truckload rates have dropped significantly. And if you look at the trends, whether you're going from Charlotte, North Carolina to Texas or California, and you look at the trend of what the rates have been for the last 2 years, they've actually been completely flat. Okay. And unless you're dealing with like a Florida market that has a seasonal produce in like March area,
Yeah.
those rates that those trucks have been obtaining and traveling across the country have been flat for the last 2 years. And the reason is because they can't go any farther lower. The truck drivers literally can't start the trucks because now their asset prices are higher. Fuel costs have been up and down, maintenance, parts, everything else, inflation, everything is basically put a floor in.
Yeah.
So, unfortunately, and this is why I wanted to give a little bit of color, that we're only going to see rates climb on trucking costs as you go up. And so what we've been doing to kind of help prepare that today is as you're looking to place your orders from your supply chain, whether you're coming from the Pacific Northwest or whatever location, smart supply chain buyers have been coordinating their purchase at the same time.
Hmm.
And what this
Yeah.
is enabling us to do is, instead of doing one shipment from here, one shipment from there, one shipment from here, we're picking up 3 or 4 pallets from this location, 3 or 4 pallets from that location, 3 or 4 pallets from this, and putting it on a dedicated truck, which is more secure. It's safer, it's faster typically, right? And less damages. And so that has been one of the ways that I think you're going to see successful companies sort of, they're getting the benefit today, but at the lower rates by combining shipments onto one. But in the future, when rates go back up, that's going to be the way they help combat that and try to keep their purchasing, their order points and the shipping lower on those types of things. It
Yeah.
just, unfortunately, it's the way I see it's going to happen. And I don't know when that's going to turn. We've been talking for It seems like every 6 months we say it's gonna change and start going up
Yeah.
as capacity tightens, but we're just not seeing it, right? And in every time there's a new change in world events, it changes something, and we're like,
Yeah.
okay, well, let's see. So
Well, no, I appreciate it because knowing that you're seeing that and that's why it's coming, I think is really helpful. Um, I think it does not help to just always cherry pick good trends, right, in the industry and say like, and here's why, and there's a historical impact, and there's there's post-COVID stuff that's still affecting, and there's all this, fluctuations. And I imagine in your industry, just with shipping, there's so many variables that can adjust it up versus some other things. I mean, every industry has that sometimes where you're talking about crop yields and one thing and all of this other things and switches and to do that, the shipping and logistics has had a lot of changes over the last 7 years. And so, I mean, it's good to know that I, as a business owner, would want to start to think about it, have the understanding of the background, plan for it so that you're not caught off guard and just complaining or then saying, well, maybe this is a bad month, right? Or maybe this is a blurb. It helps. I mean, you have to have that factored into your budget. You have to have that factored in it and then be looking forward to your point. What I like what you ended on too is like, okay, so if this is coming, this is ways that you can address that and start to be more strategic, which makes sense about what your previous comment is that if your logistics guy is just worried about like, well, how am I gonna get this out today? They're not thinking about bundling or having conversations about improvement or what if there's a price increase down the road to have one more reason to have them a little bit more heads up than heads down. So I think that is helpful to know, and I appreciate when asking for a trend. I'm just glad you didn't say AI. I didn't want, it's I haven't had a brewery owner yet who wants to talk about how AI is going to help them run their business yet. So I'll save that for
yeah.
someone else to
I
talk.
don't think not in our business. I mean, it does help with some things, but at the end of the day, we still have to negotiate directly with truckload. LTL
Yeah.
is different, but we have to negotiate with truckload, and we have to actually be involved, right? Because I didn't even mention the widespread fraud that's going on and theft in the truckload industry. So if you haven't heard of it, please go hit the web, type in truckload and freight fraud and theft.
Oh
Uh,
wow.
and make sure that whomever your partner is you're working with is going through the necessary checks and background checks on these carriers, and rather than just assigning the lowest one. And I think that's also why you're seeing some rate creep when you work with brokers that are going through a vetting process, a heavy vetting process, is because when times are tough, crime typically increases. And we're seeing that in our industry, right? Times are tough for the trucking. They're not getting as much. Some of the fraud that even includes, and this is a simple thing for listeners to actually fix, is your broker will probably look to book you a dedicated truck if you like a box truck or a full 53-foot truck. Well, these carriers in some situations are taking it upon themselves that if it's only 2 or 3 pallets or half of truck, they're putting more freight on your truck, or they're moving your freight while they're shipping it. And these are things that, yes, you can do rate reductions on them, but the way you can actually combat that is actually use trailer seals. And you can actually get those on Uline, no problem. They're not expensive. They have numbers associated with them. You lock them, and then you put it on. The driver can't touch it unless he's actually pulled over by the cops and actually has to produce the ticket from the cop or the inspection in order
Hmm.
to break that seal. But then it can go from you to your receiver, and your receiver needs to inspect that that seal is not cut. And if it is cut, don't touch the truck. Call your broker, have them get involved, because
Hmm.
then you have recourse in case things are damaged and everything else like that. So.
Well, another good thing for people to be aware, another reason to talk to you guys and to say, hey, here's what I'm dealing with, here's what I'm worried about, here's what I'm trying to do. All good starting points there. I want to end on one thing, Adrian. What is your, we talked about a lot of real stuff today. I really appreciate it. I want to know if there is something from 2025 in the pipeline that you are excited about that something that is starting to emerge that is saying, hey, there's going to be some, and it might be outside the beverage, the brewery industry. I mean, to is a broader element of beverage in general. But is there something coming down the pipeline for 2025 within logistics and shipping that you're excited about to end on that here this morning?
Yeah, this goes back to probably the technology
Yeah.
really in our world in how things are actually going to be more connective and more at your fingertips as a consumer is really some of the fun things that are out there, right? Is giving people more insights into what I should be paying, what should the rate be, holding more accountability and more traceability from a freight geek. That's definitely really exciting, right? I just got back with the team from the bar and restaurant show, and I'll tell you that despite all the noise that we hear in the world and everything else, the excitement and the passion and the new brands that are coming out there in the world and the creativity and flavors, I would say is probably one of the coolest things that I saw, right? We all get a chance to try a lot of the different things and some are very good and some need a little bit of improvement, but some of the interesting flavors and experiences that beverages and cocktails or whatever you're touching that day is bringing is kind of what makes me excited, right? And I think everyone's finding their home and getting really cool at how the drinking experience is happening, whether it's, in the office or out at a social event. And that's what's going to be really cool for the future, I think.
That's great. That's awesome. Adrian, always good to talk to you. Always appreciate the information and always through the lens of seeing how you can help and either answer questions for people, help out with what they're trying to solve for their business, or maybe point them in the right direction. So always good to talk.
Thank you, Dan. Really appreciate it. See you in a couple weeks.
That sounds good.